Chapter 14, Merribeth. At least 4 times on the drive to the mechanic shop, Merribeth opened her mouth as if to speak and then closed it again. She knew that Chance had expected a response to his revelation, and she wanted to give him one, but she wasn't sure what to say yet. Her head wanted to tell him that she appreciated his apology, but it didn't make a difference in her feelings. They still needed to remain merely co-workers. Unfortunately, her heart had a different take entirely. Her heart wanted to tell him that she understood. His father's affair had rocked everyone, and she'd felt even then that he was breaking off their relationship out of fear. She had made poor choices along the way as well. Even though she wouldn't trade Lucas for the world, Colin could easily be described as one of those poor choices. So she definitely understood, and she could even see that he had changed. He was not only more solid physically, but she could see that he was mentally as well, or that he wanted her to think he was. And that was the real issue, not Chance so much as herself. She'd always thought her judgment was sound, but then Chance had broken up with her when she'd thought he was going to propose. After she'd picked up the pieces and reassembled herself, she'd fallen for Colin, who'd left her. Everything in the last few years pointed to the fact that she might be a terrible judge of character and actions. So how could she trust her own judgment of his honesty? He had rescued her last night, picked her up this morning, and encouraged her to alert Dougie about Colin. Now he was spending his lunch hour running her around town to pick up a picture and check on her car. Maybe he was just doing it to be nice, or maybe he would do it for any employee. But she couldn't help but think that at least some of it was because he still had feelings for her. And as much as she wanted to deny it, she still had feelings for him as well. But would opening her heart to him a second time be wise? The shop where her car had been towed was a small operation not far from the deli. Both garage bay doors were open, and she could see her Oldsmobile up on a lift. She hoped that meant they had found the problem and were able to fix it. As she stepped out of the car, the smell of oil and rubber filled the air. Chance fell into step beside her as she approached the greasy man behind the counter. "Can I help you?" The man pulled a dirty rag from the pocket of his equally dirty overalls and proceeded to wipe his hands on it. However, they were no less black when he finished and shoved the rag back into his pocket. "I'm the owner of the Oldsmobile that was brought in. I was hoping you'd be able to tell me what was wrong and how much it will be to fix it." "Yep, I actually just finished looking over that one. Appears to be a bad catalytic converter. It's fixable, and the part isn't that expensive. Labor and parts will be about $500. $500? If that wasn't expensive, she would hate to hear a number that was. The words felt like a punch to her gut, and while Merribeth figured it could be worse, she didn't really have that kind of money laying around. Still, it would be cheaper to fix the car than get a new one, at least for now. "How long will that take?" "Shouldn't take more than a day once we get the part in." "You don't have it here?" How long was this job going to take? She couldn't be without a car for weeks, and she couldn't ask Chance to keep picking her up and dropping her off. The man shook his head. "Nope. I'll have to call around. If I can find it local, we can probably have the car back to you tomorrow." She didn't want to ask, but she had to know. "And if you can't find it local?" He shrugged. "Best guess would be 3 or 4 days, maybe a week." "A week?" The words exploded out of her mouth before she could stop them. "I can't be without my car for a week?" Chance placed a hand on her arm. "Why don't we wait and see if he can find anything local? If not, we'll see about getting you a rental car for a few days." She didn't want to have to get a rental car for a few days, and she didn't want to have to ask Chance for any more rides, but it appeared the situation was out of her hands. Was it just a coincidence, or was this God giving her opportunities to see Chance in a new light? Fine. The man behind the counter nodded. Okay, let me just get your information, and I'll call you as soon as I have an answer. Are you able to fix the carburetor issue as well? Chance asked when Merribeth finished giving her information. Chance, it's fine. Though the carburetor issue was annoying, Merribeth saw the dollar signs rising with every problem they pointed out. No, it's not fine, he said to her before turning his attention back to the mechanic. She has to use a screwdriver to keep the flap open to start the car. The mechanic looked from Chance to Merribeth, as if deciding who was in charge and therefore should be the one he addressed. He finally decided on Chance. I'll take a look, but it should be an easy fix. That wasn't necessary, Merribeth hissed to Chance as they exited the garage. It was completely necessary, Merribeth. Having to stick a screwdriver in your engine to start your car isn't safe, and it makes no sense not to have him look at it while he's addressing the converter issue. Look, I know you said you wanted to make up for before. This isn't about what I said at the restaurant, Chance said, interrupting her. This is about making sure you're safe when you're driving around with your son. That's all. Merribeth stared at him, sure that she should say more, but unsure of what those words should be. He matched her stare, as if daring her to contradict her own safety. Fine. The word felt like an admission of weakness, but Chance did have a point. Let's just go get that picture and get back to work. A small smile played across Chance's lips, which infuriated Merribeth even more. He seemed to be enjoying playing her protector more than she thought he should. But she also couldn't deny that it felt a little nice. It had been so long since someone had looked out for her. But why did it have to be the one man she had sworn never to fall for again? The ride to her house was quiet, but not entirely uncomfortable, as if they both were trying to figure out where this left them now. Still, relief that she'd have a few minutes to herself, away from his gaze, flooded her as he pulled into her driveway. Her hand was on the handle before the car was fully stopped, and the words, "I'll be right back," flew out of her mouth as he put the car in park. Though he looked as if he wanted to argue, he simply nodded, and she bolted out of the car before he could change his mind. The old picture of her and Colin was the only one she had kept, and only because she wanted to have something to show Lucas if he asked one day. She found it tucked inside Lucas's baby book, where she had stashed it years ago, knowing he would never look there, and turned to head back outside. As she did, though, something caught her eye. It was just a picture in a frame, one that Holly had taken of her standing behind Lucas as he blew out the candles on his birthday cake, but it was on the wrong shelf. She always kept the picture frames on the highest shelf, so that Lucas didn't knock them over by accident, as he was prone to do when reaching for his coloring books that she kept on the lower shelf. But now that frame was on the middle shelf. Had she moved it when she dusted last and forgotten to put it back? She didn't think so. And as she turned to scan the rest of the room, an eerie feeling that someone had been in her house settled on her shoulders. Fear rooted her feet to the floor. Should she go and check the rest of the house to see if anything was missing? That seemed logical, unless whoever had been in her house was still there. Suddenly, the only thing she wanted was to get out of her house. With the picture firmly in her hand, she dashed for the door, locking it behind her. "What's wrong?" Chance asked as she slid into the seat. A part of her didn't want to tell him. She didn't need him any more involved until she sorted out her feelings. But she could tell from the pounding of her heart in her ears that she must look as frightened as she felt. "Maybe nothing, but I think someone's been in my house." As she'd expected, his jaw clenched and his gaze hardened. "Give me your key." "What? Why?" "I'm going to make sure no one is still in the house." Merribeth shook her head as she pictured the interior of her house. It wasn't as neat as she would like it to be, especially if her ex was going to be poking around in it. However, she did have a 5-year-old who was notorious for making another mess as soon as she picked one up, and Chance was bound to understand that. "You don't have to do that." "I know I don't have to, but I'm not letting you go back into that house until I know it's safe. Besides, I was trained for stuff like this." Merribeth thought about mentioning his injury, but the intensity in his eyes told her that he wasn't going to take no for an answer, regardless of what she said. She held out her keys and watched as he entered her house. The minutes seemed to drag by, and she debated joining him, but before she could decide, Chance reappeared. "Did you see anyone?" she asked as soon as he slid back into the driver's seat. He shook his head as he held out her keys. "No one, and it didn't look ransacked. How did you know someone had been in there?" Merribeth bit her lip. Would he think she was crazy? "There was a picture frame in the wrong place. I know that sounds nuts, but I always keep them up high because of Lucas, and it was on the second shelf." "I don't think you're nuts. We know someone was watching Lucas the other day. Whether it's your ex or not, he could have followed you home. I didn't see any sign of a break-in, though. Does he have a key?" Disbelief at her stupidity flooded Merribeth as she thought back to the meeting with her lawyer, and her mouth fell open. Colin had given her the house 3 years ago, but he hadn't returned his key. In the moment, she had thought little of it, but now she couldn't believe she hadn't demanded his key. "I never thought to ask for it back. At first, I think I was just shocked that he would leave his son, and then maybe relieved that he'd left us the house." She dropped her head into her hand. "I am so stupid." Chance pulled her hand down and placed a finger under her chin to lift her eyes to his. "You're not stupid. You were doing what you thought was right. Unfortunately, now it seems that your house is no longer safe. I'd like you and Lucas to stay at the resort." Merribeth shook her head. She couldn't do that. Every fiber of her being felt like she was infringing on Chance as it was. And uprooting Lucas could turn into a headache. "Just for a night or two. At least until we get the locks changed. Please?" She wanted to say no. She hated the fact that Colin was uprooting her life even though they were no longer together. She hated that Chance was swooping in like her savior after he'd left her. She hated that she was supposed to be mad at him, but all she wanted to do right now, as he stared intently at her with eyes full of concern, was lean forward and taste his lips again. "Okay." "Good." He dropped his hand from her chin, and Merribeth immediately missed the warmth of his touch. What was wrong with her? She was not supposed to be having feelings for Chance. "Let's grab what you'll need while we're here. Besides," he said with a smile, "at least this way you won't have to worry about getting to work without a car." She rolled her eyes even as she chuckled. Finding the bright side was supposed to be her job. "I'll still have to get Lucas to Edith's, though." A mysterious twinkle lit up Chance's eyes. "What if you don't?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if we can find a way to entertain him at the lodge? That way he could be close, and you could keep a better eye on him." Merribeth loved the idea, but Chance had clearly forgotten the one major problem with his plan. "That would be amazing, but we don't have an on-site daycare." "Not yet, but maybe it's time we change that."